The Cinders of Dezu, written and read by Oliver Tonic. A tyrant king, a missing girl, and a journey through a perilous world. Join me for this completed sci-fi fantasy novel, read as an audio series. Enjoy the story from here on, or binge from the beginning with the first episode. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. My audiobooks are totally free. If you'd like to donate to support my writing, though, check out my Patreon in the description. And now, back to the tale. Chapter 3. The Savior King. So you're from where? Salt Lake City, said Cairo. I was born in Arizona, but I was raised around him most of my life, said Julian. I'm from Hollywood, California, said Raina with some confidence. No, you're not, Fluff, said Cairo. Raina sighed. Whatever, it's just easier to tell people that. He smiled at the two guards. She moves all the time. Her dad is a movie star, so, he moves around a lot. He's got a lot of houses and a lot of places. The two men before him stared blankly. Cairo cleared his throat in a short, awkward silence. You may have heard of him? Devin Crew. He's pretty famous. You've probably seen some of his movies. His movies? Said the guard next to Boke. Yeah, movies. He's a movie star, Cairo said. He's a star? The guard asked. Julian laughed. Okay, you both seem real committed to this whole live-action role-play bit, he said. But can we talk about the wolves outside? I'm pretty sure those were actual wolves. For the first time ever, I just experienced running for my life from a wild animal, so, what is this? Boke spoke with a face full of skepticism. Do you mean the shadow dogs? Cairo and Julian looked at each other. Boke brought his fist to his lips and loudly cleared his throat. I'm very sorry, but the rest of these questions are going to need to be answered for us. Perhaps then we can answer some of yours? Julian leaned back in his seat and sighed. Go ahead, man. The three of them sat in a room in a building the men had called the Processing Center. It matched the strange mixture of modern and old-fashioned medieval architecture. As he had led them through the cobblestone streets, they had noted that despite the lit torches that lined every corner, the town was quiet. The processing center was a bit larger than some of the odd-looking homes, but it still wasn't particularly big. They had been led to a room to sit facing the guards on a wooden bench. Okay, Boke said, looking at his clipboard. Second question. How did you get here? Chased here by wolves, as previously mentioned, said Julian. Before that we don't know, Cairo interjected. We followed my cousin here. We're a little unclear on the details. Where are we? Boke scribbled on his board. Again, let me finish. Just one more. What is your business in this town? Julian leaned forward. To escape the wolves, man. And there was another thing out there. Something bigger and more. My friend and I were looking after my cousin. Something really strange happened once we found her, and we ended up here. We'd really like to know what's going on. Boke kept writing, focused intently. All anyone could hear was scribbling for a moment. Then he stopped and looked over the page. The second guard looked at the clipboard over his shoulder, until Boke abruptly stood up with his eyes not leaving the paper. I'll be a moment, he said. He turned and left the room. The second guard quickly followed, closing the door behind them. Julian leaned forward on the bench and laced his fingers together. Dude, what is this? Cairo looked at him just as Raina gently grabbed his forearm. He turned to her briefly and saw her concerned face. He held her hand tight before he answered him. I don't think we're on the island anymore. Julian nodded exaggeratedly. I'm not Toto, but I think we can agree on that, Dorothy. Cairo shrugged. It sounds crazy, but I'm not ruling out dimensional displacement. Here we go, Julian said, rubbing his forehead. I knew you were going to say we fell into a comic book or something. I'm serious, man. What happened to us was way too extravagant to be a prank or whatever. Uncle Dev has money, but this is extra. And he probably would have told me. That's a good point, said Cairo. He might pull something elaborate on us for our visit, but he's with her all the time, so unless she's in on it. Cairo looked at Reyna, who gave him a doubtful look. I was sleeping. Yeah, that too, he said. The door to the room opened back up, and Boke stepped in. The three looked up at him as he spoke. Okay, so it looks as though we will need to have the king come see to you. We've sent word to alert him. Julian looked at the guard and smirked. Sent word to the king, huh? Did you send a guy on horseback? Boke cocked his head slightly. No, I called him, said Boke. Julian cocked an eyebrow. How does using a phone fit into your whole Dark Ages village thing? Phone? Boke asked. Julian threw his head back with a scoff. You guys are bad at this. Boke cleared his throat again as he pulled something from his pocket. I have something to read to you. His hands trembled as he unraveled a small, rolled-up piece of paper. It was rolled tight. He had trouble opening it and keeping it open, as it appeared it hadn't been read in some time. Welcome, dearest traveler, to Dezu. Boke swallowed hard and continued. I am sure you are deeply confused and troubled by your new surroundings. It is the duty of my men and I to guide you back to the safety of your home. Please, do not be alarmed. Trust my men with your care until I arrive. I will be at your service shortly as your personal escort to see you off. Yours truly, King Orion. Boke finished the letter and let it quickly roll up. He tightly rolled it the rest of the way and quickly exited the room. The door closed behind him with a thud. The three sat, staring at it. Reyna put her hands on her cheeks and started alternating rubbing them up and down, scrunching up her face. Okay, she said. So I'm starting to think I'm not dreaming. She looked over at the guys. The looks on the faces looking back at her were not comforting. For the next 20 minutes or so, they talked alone in the room about how the night went, alternating between disbelief and reconsideration of the facts. Julian's take on it was still that this was some sort of reenactment, or movie set, or maybe even a reality show. Cairo kept pointing out the wolves and the special effects needed to replicate whatever they saw beyond the tree line. Also, he couldn't get over the insurance liability that all of that would entail. None of them had signed any waivers. Reyna decided definitively that she wasn't still sleeping after pinching herself as hard as she could on her forearm. She then insisted everyone else do the same. The door handle turned, and the door creaked open again. The three stopped talking and gave it their attention. In walked a reasonably tall figure, draped in a large black cloak at the shoulders. He wore a silver breastplate with intricate markings carved into it. Cairo recognized them to be the face of some sort of animal, with metal detail work around it. The face looked something like a bull, but had two sets of horns, one on the top and one set protruding from where the nostrils should be. He walked in, followed closely behind by Boke and another attendant. He had a clean-cut, soft brown mustache and goatee, with a quiet smile decorating his lips. He looked to be perhaps in his late 40s, and yet the days of his youth adorned his face. He approached them with a soft step and his silky black pants highlighted in red. "Hello and welcome," he said as he approached each of them to shake their hands. "My name is Orion, and I wanted to offer you my sincerest apologies for any inconveniences you may have experienced." He went down the line, starting with Julian. Julian stood and extended his hand. Orion clasped both his hands around it firmly and shook. He did the same with Cairo, who also stood. "Everyone has a different story of how they stumbled onto this place. I trust yours is equally puzzling." He reached Reyna in his line of greetings. She stood and looked up at him. Orion looked at her and paused for a moment. His soft smile stayed, but his hand hesitated before shaking hers. "Hello, young lady. What's your name?" "Reyna," she said. "Reyna," he repeated. He took her small hand gently in his. He looked into her eyes a moment and then looked back at the boys. The important thing is that we get you all home as quickly as we can. He slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled something out. He held it in front of them, and they all circled around it. It was another crystal. This one was a deep, vibrant purple. It had a wildly oscillating light inside that almost looked like an electric current. Orion looked back at the guards, but kept his hand out, letting the three get a closer look. You men can step out. Go ahead and take this chair and bench with you. The men obeyed, going around the four of them and taking the seats out of the room. Cairo spoke up. This looks like... You saw a red one, right? Similar flickering glow to it? Yeah, Raina said. Julian got it for me. Yours is really pretty. Orion smiled. Thank you. But it's more than just pretty. It's your ticket home. The door behind them closed as the men left with the wooden furniture. Orion's eyebrows lifted up. Are you ready? His tone sounded like they were about to play a game. Before any of them could respond, the purple stone lit up bright. This time, because they were looking directly at it, Cairo and Julian closed their eyes. When they opened them, the processing center was gone. They saw the shimmering purple stone still in the king's hand as he slipped it neatly back in his pocket. Julian spun around and saw that the room they were now in was round with no corners. It seemed to be lit only by a single torch hung on the wall, bathing the room in a dim and flickering orange light. The walls and ceiling were made up of a soft orange stone. Julian felt like he was out of breath. What the what? Raina saw under her bare feet that they all stood on a large red and yellow stone insignia of a flame that was carved into the floor. She looked around the room. She noticed 2 open-air windows that revealed a bit of the night sky. The sounds of the chirping creatures of the dark reached her ears. She then noticed 2 doors, one on either side of the room. One looked wooden and old-fashioned, like the doors of the processing center. The other, on the opposite side, looked heavy and made of metal. Cairo's eyes were on Orion as he walked towards it. This isn't home, he said. No, it's not, Orion said as he opened the door with a heavy scraping noise. Home is this way. He waved them over without looking at them. Come. Cairo and Raina began approaching him in the open door. Beyond it was pitch black. It clearly went to another room and not outside, as it lacked anything resembling a night sky. Nuh-uh, said Julian, staying in place. I need answers, bruh. I'm not going anywhere until I know what's happening right now. Cairo stopped and looked back at his friend. Orion smiled and shook his head. I understand your concern. The king pulled the door closed again. He gently dragged his fingers across the orange stone wall at the side of the door until he touched an indentation. He pulled a rectangular stone piece of the wall out of place and then stepped aside so they could see. This building is called a crossover sanctuary, and the room beyond this door is called a transportation chamber, the king said. People usually cross from your world to this one and land where you are standing now, or at one of the many other crossover sanctuaries in my kingdom. For reasons I'll soon be looking into, it didn't quite work out that way for you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his glowing purple crystal. This violet gem allows me to send you home. You simply walk through this door, and I place it in this compartment that leads to the same room. When it lights up again, you'll be back where you belong, and you'll have quite the peculiar story to tell your friends and family. Julian's eyebrow raised. No. I want to know what this place is. Where are we? I don't see what's so hard about that question. Orion sighed. You've had it answered. You just weren't listening. This place is called Dezu, as I mentioned in the letter the guard must have read to you. I'm Orion, the king of this place. I'm sending you home now. No, but... Julian started. Cairo cleared his throat. I think what he's trying to say is, where is Dezu? What is Dezu? How did we get here? Orion rubbed the side of his face. Raina kept quiet as she looked up at him. She was closest to him in the line for the door. Look, I don't know exactly how all the science works, said the king, but how it's been explained to me is that this is another dimension, or another world. It's not Earth. You are impossibly far from home. Cairo shot a quick glance at Julian with raised eyebrows. Julian rolled his eyes. Now, I know that may excite you, the king continued, perhaps making your curiosity run wild. But instead you should be very concerned. Concerned that you took an unexpected trip to an unexpected and, might I add, fairly dangerous place. I set up this service so that when people like you get caught here, they can get back to their normal everyday lives as quickly as possible. So if you please. Orion turned around and put the rectangular stone back inside the hole in the wall. As he did, a figure suddenly appeared in the peripheral of Julian's vision. It was only for a split second, but Julian recognized it as a man. He was looking straight at him and had his finger up to his lips in a gesture that clearly meant to keep quiet. Julian's eyebrows raised as this figure vanished as quickly as he appeared. Orion reached the heavy metal door and began dragging it open with a screeching noise. As Julian looked on at the king with his friend just ahead of him, he experienced a new sensation of the surreal. In a silent instant, he watched Cairo disappear from sight. Julian's eyes widened. He heard some kind of shuffling of feet and then felt a tap on his shoulder. Then, the feeling of a hand over his mouth. He tried to scream, but it was muffled by a palm pressing tightly against his lips. He was being pulled backwards. He felt the sensation of falling. He had a brief second to look down at himself as he lost his footing. Then he realized there was nothing for him to look at. His own body had disappeared. He was about to panic when he felt a sharp prick on his shoulder. Orion finished opening the heavy scraping door and turned back around. Come, right? His head darted in all directions, looking for the boys. Reyna was still looking up at him. As she turned around to see what he was looking for, she felt the king's hand grab her arm firmly. Breach! Orion's voice boomed through the sanctuary. Reyna cringed and tried to drop to her knees, but Orion held her up. She shut her eyes tight. A powerful boom with a crack of wood echoed in her ears. When she looked up, she saw the door on the other side of the room was shattered and smoldering with flames. Just beyond the opening, she could see the outside of the outline of two men huddled on the other side of the wall. Get in here! Orion yelled. The men fumbled with their spears as they stepped carefully over the flaming leftover pieces of the door. They looked at him bewildered and then looked around the room. No, block the door, block it! He said, his hand still firmly around Reyna's bicep. The men crossed their spears and backed up to cover the entrance as instructed. They stood there for a moment, looking at their king for further instruction. Orion shook his head. No, get out, go! Reyna was breathing quickly and trembling. Kai! She called out. Orion walked with her to the door, holding her firmly but not tugging her too much. The guards at the entrance hadn't moved when he reached them. Take her and step out, he said, now in a softer tone. The men nodded, and one of them took her by the other hand. As Orion released her, he caught the fear in the little girl's eyes. Keep her safe, he said, still looking at her. The men left the room and took Reyna outside. They stood a few meters away and looked back at the king's cloak blocking the doorway. From her vantage point, Reyna could see him stretch his arms into the room. The open-air windows lit up. She and the guards backed up as they felt heat pouring out from the building. A fire surged and swirled around the inside of the sanctuary, bellowing loudly through the forest around them. Reyna felt tears run down her face as she tried again to fall to her knees. This time the guard next to her let her fall, but still held her hand. She began to sob. Cairo! She cried out. She kept saying his name over and over. The sound of the flames mostly drowned her out. But slowly they died down inside the windows, and the king turned his ear in her direction. All at once the flames stopped, and he turned toward her and his men. Reyna kept desperately crying out the name of her cousin through her tears. Orion ran towards them. Reyna could see his chest plate was glowing red hot in the dark. She saw him rip it from his chest and toss it to the ground. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around her. Reyna was hysterical and didn't know what to make of this sudden embrace. Orion held her tight to his very warm chest, covered in silky black material. Her ears were covered in his arms, but she could hear his muffled hushes to her cries. "It's gonna be all right. It's okay." Raina felt her tears soak into his shirt. He was rubbing her back as she continued to weep. When her sobs began to slow, he pulled her from his chest and looked at her tear-stained face. "Where did they go? What happened?" she whimpered. He stood up and helped her to her feet. "They were taken," the king whispered softly. He looked back at the stone sanctuary. "By someone very bad." Raina's eyes began to well up again. Orion turned back to her. "But we are going to find them." Hey guys, it's Oliver. Thanks so much for listening. Give me a like and subscribe if you want to hear more. Support this book and my continued writing through Patreon. I'll have regular episodes up until all chapters of this story are fully released, so stay tuned.